Thank you all for coming today. This is my presentation that I like to call From Your Brain to the Page, How to Write for Comics. So through this presentation, I'll talk about my writing process of how I take a comic book from conception to outlining my ideas, formatting my script, and then how I work with an artist to bring that presentation to life. So a little bit about myself. I am Wesley Gift. I am a independent comics creator from Central Kentucky. I started creating comics back in 2020. During the pandemic, I took a comic book writing class with Ron Mars, who's written for DC and Marvel and a number of other publishers, which kind of gave me the inspiration to go on and create my own comics. And I've done that for a few years now. So yeah, my presentation will kind of be like a shortened version of his class. So that's the best way I can think of to put this together. So I'm going to cover, this is the outline for today. I'm going to walk you through how you organize your ideas and get those down on paper. Then we're going to talk about the comic script breakdown, what the script looks like in that format, and how things should be formatted. That way, when you give it to an artist, they understand. You're fine. That way, when you give it to an artist, they understand how things are supposed to look on the page. Some tips on writing, how to find an artist to work with, because of course, creating comics, writing is just one part of the process. How to find an artist, working with that artist, and then you finished your comic, what can you do with it now? So in the example that I have to share with you, my friend Adam Fields was the artist behind that artwork. So normally he and I tag team these sort of things, but he's doing another show somewhere else. Okay, so when you start with creating a comic, it's important to get your ideas down and think about, well, how long is this story that you're going to be telling? Okay, is it going to be a few pages? Is it going to be a one-shot comic? Or are you thinking of a mini or an ongoing series? Just how big do you envision this story to be? Okay, once you have an idea as far as length, and I'll tell you, so when we did Ron Mars's class, his class was all about telling a complete story in 6 pages. And Ron said, if you can tell a comic book story in 6 pages, if you can master that, or at least get practice with that, then you can do one that's 8 pages, and then 12, and then on to a full book, which is 24 pages or more, or a whole series. Okay, but you need to start small and work your way up to longer stories. Okay, so we have an idea of what we want our story to be. Let's start writing down some components. Okay, we need to think of the characters. Who all is involved in this story? Okay, when you think of characters, since we're going to be working in a visual medium, we got to know what the characters look like. Okay, what's their race, ethnicity, their height, their body size, hair color, what's their personality? Maybe their personality comes through in their body movements when they're on the page. Things of that. Also, what's important is the setting. When or where does this story take place? Okay, and this doesn't have to be in any sort of format. It could be just be a list that you jot down on a sheet of paper, or if you open up a Word or Google Doc and just type it out. And then for me, what I think is most important is conflict. Okay, what happens in the story that drives it forward? Okay, what's the incident that gets all the characters involved that they have to work through and overcome? Okay, once you have an idea of how long your story is going to be, who all's involved, where it takes place, and what's the conflict that happens, you want to try and summarize that whole story in 1 to 2 sentences. You can kind of think about it as your elevator pitch. Okay, if you're going to get someone excited about your story, you have to basically summarize it in 1 to 2 sentences. Okay, and so here's an example of one of my character descriptions. This story that we'll be walking you through is about war. And so the main character is Lieutenant Kelly, and I've described him as a white male, mid-20s. He's a soldier, athletic build, brown hair, military-style haircut, blue eyes. He is loyal and dedicated and maintains his cool under pressure. See, we kind of have a physical description of what Lieutenant Kelly looks like and a little bit about his personality that will shine through in the story. Okay, and as far as the summary, I encapsulated my 6-page story in 2 sentences. In the not-so-distant past, Lieutenant Kelly, a soldier, attempts to complete his mission as the enemy lays siege to the city of Bangor, Ireland. Okay, so again, I've encapsulated everything about my story into 1 to 2 sentences. Okay, so now that we have our ideas on paper, we need to start organizing those a bit more. So it's helpful to make an outline and a beat sheet. Okay, an outline is about a paragraph summary. We're going to tell a little bit more about our story in our outline. Okay. It's also important to start thinking about your art references. Essentially, you as the writer, how do you want this story to look? Okay, for example, I wrote this 6-page story in Ron's class. I gave it to my friend Adam and I was like, here's my script, can you draw this for me? Absolutely. Well, then he started coming back to me with questions. He was like, well, Wes, these are soldiers. What do their uniforms look like? What do their weapons look like? You've given me this city, but what is this, there's different parts of this city. What do the cities look like? What are the military vehicles look like? He wanted references because he wanted to know what I was thinking about for the story so that he could translate that in his art style on the page. So art references is simply a bulleted list where you list, for example, I had on my list military uniforms, and I went on Google Images and found a military uniform that I thought fit my character. So I grabbed the URL of that uniform and just added to the list. So it's military uniform and then the Google image. And I gave the list of art references to Adam. That way, as he's drawing the story, if he's wondering, okay, well, I've got this soldier, what kind of rifle is he carrying? He can check my art references and click on the link and say, this is what Wes has in mind. So I can take this picture and then draw it into the story, okay? Otherwise, if you don't have art references, your artist might be great like Adam, and he may ask the writer, hey, what are you thinking about for this particular item? Or the artist may just make the decision themselves. So it's always helpful to have art references, okay? So we have the outline, which again is about a paragraph summary of your story. Now let's look at the beat sheet. So the beat sheet essentially tells us what we envision happening on every single page. So in this case, the story that I wrote, To Keep Fighting, it's 6 pages long. So I simply wrote page 1, 2, 3, all the way down to 6, and I just describe the action that's happening on each page, okay? This is more for the writer than the artist, but this has helped me think visually about how this story unfolds to page and what needs to happen on each page to continue moving the story forward. Okay, now we're going to look at the format of how these comic pages should be written from the writer's perspective. Okay, and you can use any word processor to write your script, Microsoft Word, Google Docs. I use them both. But we're looking at, this would essentially be the top of the page. But at the top left-hand corner, you want to credit the team. You want to put the title of the story, as well as who's doing what. So for this story, Adam is doing the art and colors, and then I'm doing the story, which is the written part, the story itself, and the lettering. Okay, and that'll be in the header of your page. That way it shows up on every single page of your document. Next up, we want page details. Okay, we need to know what page we're on and how many panels are on that page. The panel are just the boxes or different shapes that separate the story. Okay, this is helpful because when the artist gets this, they know, okay, page 1, 3 panels. They get that right at the beginning, so they can start to think about how can I break up the action on this page. Okay, so that's typically centered at the top of the page. And then next we have panel headings. Okay, your panel headings and panel description. So we've got to identify panel 1, and in this case for this page we have 3 panels. So we'll have another one, panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, and we need to describe what happens in this panel. We can also give the artist some instruction as to how this panel should look or be styled on the page. So for example, I start with, it's a horizontal panel, okay, and it's the largest on the page. So that tells my artist this is the biggest panel on the page, okay. We also give some instruction as to perspective, okay. So largest panel on the page, bird's eye view of Bangor, the city on the coast. Okay, so now we know we're in the city, it's near the water, but a bird's eye view, we're up in the air looking down on the city. Okay, and again, these little cue words give the artist an idea of how things should be styled in this panel. Okay, so we kind of got to know time of day, location, perspective, and then we get into the action that's happening. So it's high noon, explosions from the artillery shells rock the city, sending plumes of smoke into the overcast sky. Enemy soldiers, almost like ants, can be seen in the distance pouring out of amphibious assault vehicles along the beach. Also, because this is the first page, I want to leave some space to credit the team. I put a note in here, please leave space in top left for title and top right for credits, okay? Because typically when you open up a comic, it'll either have a title page on the inside or they may put some credits on that very first page, okay? If you have art references, of course, that could be on a separate sheet, or you could put, for instance, if I wanted a specific look for the assault vehicles, I might put in parentheses the link for the art reference. Okay, some writers put that in the panel description itself. Some of them provide it in a different list. So it's basically however you want to do it. As long as you include them, your artist will thank you for that. So, and again, once you list the page, you put how many panels you want on a page. If you want that page to be one single panel of art, that's called a splash page. Okay, that tells the artist this is one single panel. And from my understanding of working with artists, it's nice to have a splash page because that gives them an opportunity to put in a lot of detail into a page. And that's a lot of artists like working as much detail into pages as they can. So splash pages, again, gives an artist an opportunity to really flex their creativity and their skill when you include those in your story. Am I going too fast? Okay, we have a small group. If you have any questions and want to throw your hands up, by all means, feel free. Okay. So now we're continuing on with the comic script breakdown. We're going to talk about dialogue. Okay. So now we're on page 4. I made a goof. I forgot to put the panels up here. It's on me. But now we're talking about dialogue. When you have dialogue in a panel, that will immediately follow the panel description. So here in panel 1, we have Lieutenant Kelly holding the little girl, rises to his feet and cries out in pain. Okay. So Lieutenant Kelly has some dialogue. After your panel description, you want to bold these so it helps stand out. So we know who's speaking and what they're saying. You also need to number your instances of dialogue. What this does is that for the letterer, that's the individual that creates the balloons and puts the text in each panel. When the letterer looks at your script, they're going to see this and say, okay, this is page 4. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 instances of dialogue. I already know how many balloons I have to put on this page to help show that the characters are speaking or interacting with one another. So it's important that you number them 1 through whatever per page. So on page 5, this numbering would start over because it's a brand new page. You start back at 1. Okay, so sometimes you have characters that are off panel. They're not in the frame that we're looking at. They're off panel, but they're still interacting with characters that we see. So that's called off panel. So if you have a character who is off panel speaking to characters that we see in the panel, you just indicate after their name, you put off in parentheses. Okay, that helps the artist realize, okay, someone else is speaking here, but we don't need to see them in the panel. And that tells the letterer, okay, when I draw the tail of this balloon, I got to make sure I draw it leading off the panel so we know someone else in this space is speaking, but we don't see them yet. Okay. And then adding emphasis. Sometimes, of course, characters get emotional. If you want to emphasize some words in your dialogue, you can indicate that to the letterer by simply putting an underline underneath that piece of dialogue. So, for example, on this page, Lieutenant Kelly is urging the citizens to get out of the city. He says, get out of the city, head south, go now. And so by underlining now, when the letterer gets that, they will format the dialogue in that balloon to show that he's really emphasizing that you have to leave immediately. Okay, almost done with comic strip breakdowns. A few of the things I want to point out. So if you include a title, I mentioned having a title credit. You want to make sure you indicate that this is a title. And then sometimes in stories, we have narration where an omniscient person is speaking, not necessarily a character of the story. And narrators are indicated by captions. So in this case, this caption, this narrator is simply telling us we're in Bangor, Northern Ireland, and it gives us a sense of time of when we are. And it's also important, especially when you have action sequences, most likely there's going to be sound or sound effects with those. And if you incorporate sound effects, if you have a fight scene and there's fists being thrown around, there's kicks flying, if there's impact with those hits, you can indicate a sound effect by writing SFX. Okay, and then you spell out what that sound effect is. Okay, crash, boom, kaboom, pop, things of that sort. Okay, so some tips about writing comics in general. One thing to consider is that the more panels you put on a page, the smaller the art has to be. Okay, I'll show some examples here in a bit, but you got to think as the panels get smaller, you know, everything that needs to be seen in the panel gets smaller as well. So it's really hard to pack detail into panels on a page where you've got 7, 8, 9 panels. Okay. When you're writing speech or dialogue, it's recommended that the max number of words you put into one balloon is 30. Because you got to think as characters are speaking, the more words you have people say in each panel, that balloon's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we don't want balloons to get so big that they overlap characters or important details in the art. The recommended number of dialogue segments per panel is 3, because again, more balloons we pack into a panel, the less of the art we see. Okay, so Jillian, I'm gonna put you on the spot. If Jillian and I are in a comic book and we're in the same talking, you know, Jillian may ask me a question, I may respond, and then she may react to my answer, and then we move on to the next panel to continue that discussion. Odd number of panels versus even number of panels. Okay, what I'm talking about there is that we all know even and odd numbers. If you give your artist a script that has a page with even numbers, let's say if a panel has 4 panels, well, we can kind of think about how those panels might be broken up on the page. Okay, it could be 4 equal squares, it could be 2 rectangles and 2 smaller squares. Okay, an even number of panels on a page kind of limits your artist to creating panels that kind of fit like a grid format. Okay, but if you're able to tell your story in an odd number of panels, you know, a splash page, 3 panels, 5, 7, then your artist has to get creative about how to shape those panels on the page. And it makes for more dynamic storytelling if you can write your script and have an odd number of panels. So the whole script doesn't have to be like that. What I typically do is that when I write my stories, one page might have an even number, the next page is odd, and I might go back and forth again, just to try to get that dynamic storytelling in my story. Okay, so I want to talk about the page turn effect. How many of you in here have ever read, maybe not a comic, but even a fiction novel or a work of nonfiction? Okay, you've read that book, and how many of you, when you picked up that book, you couldn't put it down? You would read a page and you had to find out what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. Okay, that's the author using the page turn effect to keep you engrossed in the story. Okay. So if we think about a comic book, actually, I have a comic book here. Let me pull it up and use it as an example. So if we have a comic book, we open it, we've got our title page here on the left, and your odd number pages will always be on the right. Okay, page 1, page 3, so on and so forth. Okay. So when we're laying out our story, we want to try to build up to action on the odd number pages, and that way we can do the reveal on the even number. Okay, so for example, let me see if I know you guys are far away, so I might have example I can kind of work through here. Well, in any case, on page 1, you might have characters talking, and that last panel on the page, a character starts a sentence, but they don't finish it until page 2. So if you want to find out what the character says, you got to turn the page, okay? Or maybe a character is handed a box, and they put their hand in the box on the end of page 1. Well, you want to find out what's in the box. So the writer put the reveal on page 2. So that helps us turn the page and keep us reading the story to find out what happens next. Okay.
So basically, the person reaches into the box at the end of page 1.
Yes.
Or page 2.
Well,
And
hit
then-
page 1, and then you want to find out what's in the box.
So you have to turn the page,
Yes,
and then out comes the cutest kid ever.
that's right. So yes, page 1, someone hands you, what's your name? Heather. So on page 1 in this story, I hand Heather a box, and the box is shaking, okay? Because there's something inside it that's alive. We don't know what it is. And so at the bottom of page 1, Heather puts her hand in the box. We're nervous because we know there's something alive in here, and Heather bravely puts her hand in it, okay?
Could be a snake.
It could be a snake. It could be something not so cuddly. So we're wondering, oh my gosh, Heather just put her hand in the box. What's going to happen next? Then on page 2, she holds up a cute, cuddly kitten. So that's the idea. So again, when you're writing your script and you have your pages marked, you try to want to build up to action on the odd numbered pages and then have the reveal on the even number. That plays into the page turn effect. That'll keep your audience engrossed in the story and flip them through. There are some comics that I pick them up and I read them like that, just because I get sucked in and I'm like, what happens next? What happens next? Before I know it, I'm at the end of issue 1, then I've got to wait a few more weeks for issue 2. But that's how a good writer is structuring their stories, that they keep you engrossed and keep you entertained, wanting to find out what happens next. So, and your last page can be either an even number or it could be anywhere. It depends on your last page, I guess, depends on how you lay out your pages in your book. You might have, ads or a bio or something, but then that last page can end up wherever.
Or you could just have the hostess or ad, or you have the guy walking along and kicking sand on our brave but skinny bodybuilder, and then bodybuilder builds up, and then next thing you know.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would probably entice you.
Exactly. If they structure it that way, it'll keep you flipping the pages. What happens next? What happens next? What happens next?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there more you can do? Is there more combinations? Because I know this is one of them, but as you read more, it kind of becomes very apparent what you're reading. So I try to see what other combos there.
Yeah, and I just, gave two very simple examples, but, stories, make it more complex, and there's plenty of different tricks to, use that term, tricks you can do to put in the story to make your readers want to do that as they're reading through it. So, yeah, lots of things you can do, lots of things.
There's just one. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through just the 6-page story that I wrote and put a side-by-side comparison of the script and the page itself. So again, so page 1 should have 3 panels. You see my 3 panels here, panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. You can see I've requested the letter to put the title up in here with the credits. Take it to page, this is page 1. Page 2, you can see we have, so I wrote 4 panels, and my artist looked at this, Adam, he looked at this and he said, Wes, I need to work in an extra panel here just to help with this reveal. Because in this scene, Lieutenant Kelly is trading fire with the enemy. He looks at a photo of his love, and he realizes he's run out of ammo. Okay, so you may encounter that when you're working with your artist to produce the visuals, and that there may need to be some changes in the number of panels or what exactly happens on each panel to help the flow of the story. So with practice, you know, as a writer, you'll get better in your skill set to where structuring your story, you won't have to make these changes. But again, this is the very first comic story I ever wrote. Adam was my first experience working with an artist. So I learned a lot from that experience, and I'll talk more about that towards the end of this presentation. So, but you can see I've got my sound effects because again, Lieutenant Kelly is trading fire with the enemy, pow, 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 and then they're firing back at him. So they're hitting the concrete wall that he's behind, pick, 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 and he's looking at this picture of his love. He's thinking about her while he's in this moment of crisis. Okay. So this was a page where I had 6 panels and Adam said, well, you gave me one too many panels. I could actually tell this action in 5 panels. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see since now there's an odd number of panels on the page, Adam can do some real creative stuff with the panels themselves. So it's not so much just a grid pattern of squares and rectangles on the page. You know, he could change the shapes and make them a bit more dynamic. And with this scene, there's a lot of intensity. So that changing up the panels this way helps enhance the intensity of the scene and what's taking place. Here in this scene, the thing I want to point out here is this is where a character is off panel speaking. So Lieutenant Kelly has picked up this little girl and somebody off panel calls the girl's name. Come to find out it's the girl's grandmother looking for his granddaughter. So, and this is where he hands the granddaughter to the grandmother and he tells them, get out of the city, go now. And again, now is emphasized because he's really urging them to get out. Okay, so now we've got, this is a page with 6 panels. So you can kind of see we got that grid shape, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with this. But of course, Adam, being as creative as he is, didn't, you know, we have 6 panels on the page. They're not all the same size. He was able to, you know, change the size of these panels to help with the dynamic storytelling here. But this is where Lieutenant Kelly gets back to command headquarters and everybody's on edge because of course it's war. And he's asking, did I make it here? Did I get here in time? Because he's been carrying this message this whole time, which he hands off to a commanding officer. And then we end on a splash page and we reveal that he made it in time. He handed off this parcel to his commanding officer, but he also made it in time to see his baby daughter and his wife. So, like I said, this is a splash page. So by making this a splash page, I gave Adam a lot of creative room to play with the story. So of course we have our characters, closer of our characters here in the corner. We can see he's in some sort of hospital, and also in the window we can see that reinforcements are coming in, which is also confirmed by the radio transmission from the script. So that's writing a script in a nutshell. I know I went through that kind of quickly, but as I said, writing is just one part of the comics making process. Okay, until you hand your script over to an artist, your comic is just words on a page. Okay, so I want to talk about some tips about finding an artist, some places you can seek out people with artistic skill. First place to go is ask a friend. You know, if you know somebody who's creative and more artsy than you are, you know, you might talk to them. Hey, I've got this 4-page comic script I wrote. Can you help me turn it into an actual comic? Okay. Since I've been learning how to write comics these past 4 years, I found more and more people I didn't realize were actually into comics like I was, and were, you know, wanting to do more comics projects. So it's also a great way to build community with one another when you find like-minded people who enjoy doing the same things that you do. So I always ask a friend first, if I've got a new project in mind, hey, can you help me develop this story? Can you help me make it into something real? Social media is also a great place to look for an artist. There are a multitude of Facebook groups of people trying to get paired up on projects. Somebody's looking for a writer, someone's looking for an artist. So Facebook groups is a great place to find somebody. Twitter, Instagram. If you want to hire an artist, you can also do that. One website that I've seen people use is called Fiverr. You can go on Fiverr, and filter by artists and see examples and portfolios of artists' work that are looking for more comics to work on, more sequential art. But of course, these are people that are independent contractors, so they have their rates listed as well. So that's where you have to get into paying an artist to produce your work if you want to go down that route. Some of the best places I've found artists is going to a convention, any size convention, and going down Artist Alley and looking at artists who have their work on display and talking with them and learning about their process and learning more about how they tackle sequential art. So I love going to Artist Alley at any show, any size, because there's so much talent there that people don't realize. So it's always worth the time to walk down Artist Alley and just see what people are doing. Okay. Lastly, you can always draw it yourself. Okay. You may not be Picasso or Michelangelo or J. Scott Campbell or any of these big famous comic artists, but really, if you draw it yourself, you just need to focus on making sure that your visuals are clear. Okay. You don't have to be able to, sketch your own face. You can tell a story with stick people. You can tell a story with shapes. So it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as your visuals can help relay the story, you're set. So one last piece of advice, if you are working with another person, another artist to help you bring your story to life, you want to think about what you envision the story looking like and finding an artist who can bring that to life. Okay, so if you're working with your artist and this is a situation where you're paying somebody to produce their artwork, I have some tips about how you can navigate that process. So, of course, artists, if you hire them, they expect to be paid for their work. So you got to discuss compensation. Okay, you can ask an artist, "What's your page rate?" Okay, what do you charge to draw sequential art pages? Okay, you might ask them, if they ask a lot for pages to be in full color, you might ask them for black and white. Okay, with the absence of color, black and white, you can still tell a story in black and white art, and it might be cheaper in the long run. One thing you want to point out is that, or be mindful of, is that exposure does not help them pay the bills. Okay, if you're going to hire somebody, you need to honor that agreement. Just because you might have a great idea doesn't mean that that's going to translate into a hot selling comic book if the artist draws it for you. Something that I've worked out with some of the creators I've partnered with is what's called mutually owned property. So what we do in that case is that my artist I've been able to negotiate a lesser fee for them to produce my written stories, but we equally share ownership of the story. Okay, so for example, we have this comic book. I can take it to shows and sell it, and he or she or they can take it to shows and sell it because we both own the property. So if we choose to profit from it, we have that capability. Anytime that there is money exchanged for work when creating art, it's always best to establish and sign a contract or a written agreement. Okay, I've signed in my experience so far, I've signed a few contracts where I've paid people to produce art, and a few times I've had them sign something that says, I promise to do this work by this time. That's kind of a safety measure in the event that if they didn't produce the work, or if they didn't come back, or they took my money and ran, I have something in writing that, could help me get that person back on task, or worst case scenario, get that money back. But really, in my experience, I've had people sign a few contracts, but I've never had anybody, duck out and just run and not give me the art that I paid for. So, but again, if you pay somebody for the work, because depending on the size of the project, it can get pretty expensive, but, it's just a safety measure. So, one important thing I want to point out about comics is that the comic making process is collaborative. Okay, and you want to be sure to communicate with your artist. Okay, stay in touch, ask for them to send you progress that's being made on panels, on character designs and whatnot. Talk back and forth, okay? Because that can help ease your mind on how the project is progressing and moving forward. And it's also important to be patient, especially if you are a writer with no artistic ability. Your only contribution to this project is you've written the story. It takes, and I didn't realize this at first, but it takes artists a considerable amount of time to take your story, what you put into writing, and translate that into a visual medium. Okay, so if you're just a writer, just understand that once you've written the script, once you hand it off to an artist, they need time to think about how the story is going to look on the page. And again, your script may change when the art is complete, and that is okay. If you're communicating with your artist, hopefully they will have shared that with you. Hey, on this page, you've got 6 panels, I can reduce it to 5, or you've got too many panels. I need some room to let this story breathe. So we need to put less panels on the page, which might make the story a few pages longer. But the important thing is to communicate, okay? Talk back and forth, check in with your artist and see how the project is going. Okay, so you finished your comic book. Now what can you do with it? Well, you want to share it and get it out there into the world. So different ways you can share it. You can share it on social media or the web. Maybe you upload it to a Google Drive folder and you share the link out for people to access it, download it, read it on their computers or on their mobile devices. You can always print it and hand it out at shows. You can print it yourself and just staple the pages together, or you can talk to a print company to put the pages together and produce your book. And you can always get a booth at a convention and sell it if you wish, okay? But once you've put, a lot of time and effort into making a story, don't you want to share it with other people? Then you should put it in a medium that you can easily share it with other people. So, crowdfunding. So it can take a great deal of money to produce a comic book, depending on how big of a story you want to tell, how much you want to put into the presentation of that book. So some folks use crowdfunding sites like Indiegogo or Kickstarter to try and raise money to get that book published, usually to print mass quantities and get more copies that they can share with other people. So crowdfunding is a way that you can raise awareness about your book and get more eyes on it. And if you want to, there are comic book companies out there that publish stories, and you can even pitch your comic book to a publisher. So if you have a finished comic book and you want to pitch it to a publisher, my recommendation is submit it to an independent publisher. I'll just be flat out honest with you, not to be rude, but Marvel and DC, they don't take pitches for stories from folks they've never heard of. I've learned that Marvel and DC will go to shows and they'll look for people that they want to hire. So you don't go to them, they come to you. But a lot of other publishers, Dynamite Comics, Black Mass Studios, Image Comics, Keen Spot, the list goes on and on. If you get on their website, they will most often have a link that says submissions. And you click on that link and they will tell you how you can pitch your comic book to that company. And a lot of them have very specific instructions. And if you want to pitch something to a publisher, you need to follow those instructions to a T, because that shows that you're really serious about this project, and you understand the business essentially, but just by following their instructions. So in any case, if you have a comic, it's great to just share it with whomever. Okay, so there's a lot of resources out there that can help you become better at writing comics. And I've put these 5 up here on the screen that I have in my library that I've read them, and then I often go back and flip through them to remind myself. Stan Lee's got a great one called How to Write Comics, Comics Experience Guide to Writing Comics. This group actually offers, I haven't taken any of their classes, but they offer classes on creating comics. So if you Google Comics Experience, you can find their website, check out what classes they have to offer. Filth and Grammar. This is a book about actually editing comics by Shelley Bond. So normally when I write a story, once I have it, that first draft finished, it's not finished in the sense that it's ready to send to an artist to get started. So I always take the time to revise my scripts a few times before I send them off to an artist to start producing the work.
Have you ever read Scott McCloud?
No, but I've heard great things.
Yeah, I use both his making comics and how to read a comic.
Okay,
Yeah, I was wondering if you'd read that one as well.
Those are both great.
I haven't, but that's the only one out there that I haven't read that everybody's recommended to me. So, but yes, another good resource. I've heard great things about it.
I can attest to it. It's great.
All right, so that's the end of my presentation. I put up mine and Adam's contact information up here. If you'd like to check us out on the web, follow us on social media, learn more about our work. But at this time, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
I actually just really appreciate you presenting because I'm an avid reader and I've gone electronic. So I read my DC through DC Comics, primarily for Batgirl. And I had an idea of the process, but not the degree.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd be happy to share this with you guys if you want to shoot me. Jillian's got my email. So if you'd like for me to send this on, I can forward it to you. That way you have it for reference.
Yeah.
Since you all stuck out this presentation with me, I have something to give to you all. So I told you that I'm a writer. I have no artistic ability. So I wanted to learn more about the storytelling process from that visual aspect. So I created this little mini comic called HerdCon. And since my art medium that I used were Lego sets.
Oh, that's so cool.
So, sorry, I got one more with it. So essentially what I did is I took Legos and built the scene. I had minifigures that I dressed up a certain way and basically took pictures of the scenes. I still wrote the script. I still wrote the script first, and I used that script to then guide my eye to take pictures of these Lego scenes and tell a story using Lego people.
That's very interesting.
So, yeah, because again, at best, I might be able to draw stick figures, but I'm not even that confident in my ability to do that. So I just did, pictures. So, yes.
I was just wondering, I had a question. When I'm sort of working on something and I'm thinking about making it into like a comic. The main thing I'm always stuck on is how do you take a scene like at this point, I'm somewhere between a written story and like a novel and a full-blown movie, like live action movie. The thing about I don't know exactly what to do is any scenes where there's just a lot going on, like so many dynamic things happening in unison, especially combat. How do you properly portray that on a page of like pictures, and especially in a way so that the reader doesn't get lost?
Sure. Okay. So in this combat scenario, do you have maybe a few central characters that you're focusing on? Like the main character? Okay, 2 or 3. So in your script, you might have a splash page, which I don't know if you're here for that, but a splash page is essentially one giant panel of art. Okay. And then sometimes if you have a double splash, that's 1 page of art over 2 pages. Okay. So in your script, you might specify this is a splash page, this is a double splash page, and this is your establishing shot of combat. Okay. What kind of combat? Is it like fantasy or is it like military war?
Think of it like medieval war.
Medieval war. Okay, so your establishing shot might be a splash or a double splash of all these medieval warriors in combat. Okay, so immediately we know where we are, there's intensity, and then you might identify in the foreground, okay, closer to the reader, your characters. So we see who they are. So once you establish it and we see them, then you might zoom in on just their actions for the next few panels.
Yeah, like, a row of warriors with pikes, a row of pikes, right?
Okay, yeah,
That would be a splash page. It would show, or heck, a double splash page showing the pikes over here and then whatever we're attacking over there.
right,
And then the second page, a single splash page showing a specific platoon or unit
mhm,
of them. They'll each have their own like patch to mark them out because it's their own, they trained together.
right,
And then zooming in even further, there's at least one of them, or the ones that I'm focusing on, and yeah,
yeah. And I'm glad you're focusing on action because you do want to have moments where characters are talking to one another, move the story along. But you don't want to have a comic book where it's all just talking heads. Because that would be better for a novel or maybe a TV sitcom if you're writing a screenplay. So, but yeah, essentially, and with any story, really, you want to establish where we are and then move in closer on different things.
yeah,
So you're already thinking you're along the right path, so.
thanks.
All right, any other questions?
This has been a really interesting panel and I really appreciate you giving it.
Well, thank you so much, I appreciate that.
And I'm one of the co-chairs of the convention.
Yeah, greatly.
Yeah, so thank you for coming.
Thank you.